Hello, my name is Shannon Judson, and I'm a career coach with Goodwill Industries of West Michigan. And today I'm going to be walking you through a PowerPoint webinar that I put together on basic budgeting. I have been doing finance related work for the last 20 years, so I have pretty extensive knowledge in the finance sector, budgeting being one of the areas that I concentrate most of my time on. As we go through this, if you feel that you would need or benefit from additional budgeting assistance, I will have my contact information at the end of this PowerPoint presentation, so you can contact me and schedule an appointment. So as far as basic budgeting goes, the first thing is what is a budget? Many people, when I bring up the idea of a budget, they look at me like I'm speaking a different language. It's because most people don't follow a budget. They just figure they live week to week or paycheck to paycheck without any idea of what's coming in and what's going out. And a budget, in its most basic sense, is a spending and savings plan. It's showing you what you have coming in and what you have going out. I have listed here, it's an itemized summary of likely income and expenses for a given period of time. And for most people, when it comes to budgeting, I suggest that you just do it simply on a month-to-month basis. And you'll see a little bit more detail as to what I mean as I go through this presentation here. Who should budget? Anyone with income or expenses. It doesn't matter if you're a high school student, somebody who is working through their life, or somebody who is now living on a fixed income through retirement. If you have income coming in and you have monthly expenses, you should know what you have coming in and what you have going out. It should be a family affair. So if you're married and married with children, everybody should be on the same page. Now, I understand the kids don't need to know the finer details of the budget, but nonetheless, they should have an idea as to what's being budgeted for, what the plan is, how a budget works, because that's the best way that they're going to learn. So when it comes to budgeting, it should be everybody in the household working towards the same goal. Now, why would you budget, or why should I budget? It does have the power to make your life better. It does reduce anxiety and fear. I've seen a number of people through my years who get so stressed out over their budget or their finances, they lose sleep, they become physically sick. And if they had been following a budget, would have helped to reduce the anxiety and fear that they have within their life. It also helps to eliminate impulse purchases, which add up over time. Impulse purchases are the ones that you didn't plan for. You just went out and you bought it. You were in a certain store or location. You saw something, wasn't something you had planned for, but you purchased it anyways, regardless of the cost. Budgeting helps to offset or prevent that. It also has been shown to indirectly increase savings for individuals because they no longer get late fees or past due fees. Finance charges are reduced or eliminated. So individuals are not putting more money in the bank's pockets, so to speak, and keeping more money in their own. How do you set up a budget? The most basic form of a budget is simply pen and paper. For individuals who come in to see me, when we start the budgeting process, if they don't really know where their money is going, what I suggest to them is that they keep a notebook with them for the next 30 days and write down every expense that they make. This will show them where their money is going. I've had people do it who drink coffee, not thinking that $3 a day is a big deal. But when you show that $3 a day for 30 days adds up to $90, it starts to put the numbers down. It starts to really show where the money is going. Computer spreadsheet. I use a computer spreadsheet myself. I just use an Excel spreadsheet. It's very basic. It's nothing fancy. Like I said, I've been doing this for a lot of years. My college degree is in finance, so I have a pretty good understanding of finance to begin with. I don't need a fancy program to help me with budgeting. I think it just adds to confusion for a lot of people. And the most basic form for me is just using that spreadsheet tracking my income and my expenses. There is budgeting software out there. I'm sure if you did a Google search or an internet search, you'd find a number of them on the market. Some of them may work for you, some of them may not. That may be how your brain works. And if you feel that you benefit from those, I would suggest looking into them. And then, of course, in today's day and age with the technology that we have, there are a lot of phone apps out there that individuals can get. If you went to the App Store, I would imagine you'd see dozens of them. So maybe you're one of those individuals that would benefit from one of those. But nonetheless, here are four separate categories or four different categories of budgeting options out there. Pick one of them and see how it works for you. Budgeting considerations. Before you set up your budget, identify what your goals are. Do you want to buy a home? Do you want to pay off debt? Are you trying to save for retirement or have an emergency fund? Is there something else that you want to purchase? Maybe you want to take a vacation. Determine what your actual goals are, and then have an understanding as to what length of time those goals are going to take to reach. Now, a good example I can use is somebody who's renting may say, well, I want to purchase a home one day. Well, for most people, that's going to either be an intermediate or a long-term goal. And the reason I suggest, prioritizing or looking at, the lengths of these goals or how far out these goals are is because you don't want to get discouraged. For somebody who, purchasing a home, for instance, if it's a long-term goal, I don't want them to get discouraged because they don't have enough money in their bank account after 6 months for a down payment on a house. So you need to understand what length of time you're looking at for each one of the goals that you have set within your budget. You also want to understand the difference between wants and needs. Now, I've had a number of arguments or disagreements on what needs are. I did not put this list together. This is a list that most of the individuals who are in the financial know would use. This is a list that I've used for the 20 years that I've been doing this, and it's a list that I stick to and believe in. Your needs are food, basic clothing, shelter, and transportation. Now, for everybody, those are going to look a little bit different. For instance, shelter for one person might be they're living at the mission. For another person, it might mean that they have an apartment. For another person, it might mean that they have their own home. So everybody's going to be on a different page when it comes to each one of these four needs. But nonetheless, we all need these four needs. Everything else is a want. So understand that when it comes to prioritizing your monthly expenses, if a want is more important to you than a need, then your budget is not going to work very well for you. And you need to prioritize your needs over your wants if you want to be successful in this. So when it comes to a budget, there are two sides to the budget equation. There's the income side and then there's the expense side. I'm going to start with the income side. You need to determine, what are your sources of income or where is your income coming from? Do you get a paycheck from a job? Do you have Social Security? Do you get food assistance? Are you living on retirement income? Do you have child support coming in? What income source do you have? That's where we're going to start. When it comes to wages or when it comes to your paycheck from your job, you only want to include 4 paychecks if you're paid weekly and 2 paychecks if you're paid biweekly. Understanding that there are 4 months out of the year where you're going to get 5 paychecks. And there are 3 months out of the year where you're going to get 2 paychecks if you're paid biweekly. You do not want to include those. Those can be used for such things as building up your emergency fund, or maybe you earmark those for a vacation or another special purchase that you may have in mind, but you do not want to include those in your everyday budget. Additionally, bonus pay and child support, those have the propensity to change over time and cannot be fully counted on. Bonuses are just bonuses. Some people may say, well, I've gotten a bonus every year that I've been there. Well, I've heard that before, and then all of a sudden one year the bonus didn't come in. So do not count on bonuses for your overall budget. Again, those can be used for something else. Same thing with child support. What I suggest for individuals who receive child support is that they should only use or count on about 50% of it, because you don't know what that child's partner or child's parent is gonna have happen with their source of income. So if their source of income goes down, it's going to affect your child support. Additionally, if your child is 17 years old and they're going to come off child support at the age of 18, you can't count on that for very long. So you definitely don't want to be counting that on a regular basis when it comes to your overall budget. Um, and then another thing that I see individuals make mistakes on is their income tax return. I see individuals get very large income tax returns. I've seen individual income tax returns of $9,000 before, which is a substantial amount of money. And it's great at the time when that individual gets that money. But when you know the backstory of that individual, that they've struggled from month to month, and then when they get that $9,000, they use it to catch everything up, that's not a good way to live. What would be better is if they made adjustments from their withholdings on their paycheck, so they get more money on a monthly basis or on their weekly or biweekly paychecks and get a smaller tax return. So instead of maybe 9,000, they get 3,000. If they make adjustments, which means that $6,000 difference will come on their paycheck throughout the year. And that extra $500 a month might make a huge difference in their overall budget, keeping them on track and not having to worry about getting everything caught back up when that tax return comes in. So if you are getting large tax returns, maybe you want to talk to somebody who understands taxes or understands finance to make some suggestions to you on what you should be withholding from your paycheck to make things easier for you month to month. Now, the one thing I do want to make sure I stress is that when you do make changes to your withholdings through your employer, so you get more money in your paycheck, you will get a smaller tax return. So if you count on that big tax return for whatever, it doesn't matter what the expense is. If you're counting on that, it's going to be smaller. So you need to account for that when it comes to your budgeting. Now, your expenses. There's different categories of expenses. There's fixed and there's variable. Fixed expense basically means that it stays the same throughout the year. So when I think of fixed expenses, one example I might use is your housing. So your house payment or your rent typically remains constant throughout the year. Now, I do understand that rent typically goes up every year, as do house payments when it comes to escrow adjustments. I get that. But for the most part, that payment is going to remain constant throughout the year until that adjustment month. So you can count on, if your rent payment's $400 a month, your rent's going to be $400 every single month until the adjustment takes place where they may increase it to whatever, $420 or whatever they increase it to. So there's those fixed expenses, and then we have our variable expenses. And an example of a variable expense would be gasoline. Gasoline prices fluctuate. We just saw a significant decrease in gasoline expenses due to COVID-19, which meant that our gasoline expense went down significantly. Well, as gas prices start to creep back up, it means our gasoline expenses are going to get higher. Additionally, you may have obligations or appointments out of town. So if you're driving to Grand Rapids a couple of times throughout the month that you weren't typically doing, your gasoline expense is going to be higher, which means when it comes to your budget, that's going to be a variable expense. You can't count on it being constant throughout the month. And then you have monthly and periodic. Monthly is something that you pay for every month. So again, we can pick on housing. You typically pay your rent or your house payment once a month. Whereas if it was a periodic expense, the two periodic expenses I have listed here are insurance and taxes. Those are things that we don't typically see on a month-to-month basis. Maybe, for instance, you pay your car insurance every 6 months. So that would be a periodic expense. Now, what I suggest people do is that they try to find a way to make everything to be a fixed and a monthly expense. And what I mean by that is, for instance, we were talking about gasoline. If you could determine what your average gasoline expense might be, it may take a little bit of time for you to figure this out, but say, for instance, your average gasoline expense is $100 a month. Well, you start putting $100 a month aside for gasoline. Now, if you only spend $80, that $20 that you didn't spend on gasoline rolls over to the next month, which means when you add your $100 to your gasoline for that month, you'll have $120 for gasoline for the next month. Same thing with car insurance. If your car insurance is, say, $600 every 6 months, you should be setting aside $100 a month in an account to pay for that car insurance when it comes due. This will alleviate any stress that you may have or anxiety that you may have when that car insurance bill comes in. So if you've been setting aside $100 a month for 6 months, when that bill comes in, you should have the $600 set aside to make that payment. So you've taken a periodic expense and you've made it a monthly expense. With the gasoline, you took a variable expense and you made it a fixed expense. Now, this isn't something that's going to happen in 1 month. It may be something that you have to tinker around with for a couple of months to get right. But nonetheless, it will make your budgeting easier if you can make everything fixed and monthly. And then the last thing I have on here for expenses is getting on a budget or level pay plan with your utilities. So, for instance, your gas and your lights. You can get on a fixed or a monthly level pay where your bill remains constant throughout the year. Now, some people like this and some people don't. The gripe that I hear, the complaints that I hear, is that, for instance, with gasoline, or I'm sorry, with gas for heat. Gas for heat, what will happen is they'll figure out what your average monthly bill is, and you'll pay that every single month. So, say, for instance, it's $80. Well, in February, when your gas bill is $150, you still only pay $80. The downside is in July, when your gas bill might be $20, you still have to pay $80. So it's a disadvantage in the summer, but it's an advantage in the winter. Nonetheless, you pay the same amount all year through. And it's a good way to keep a constant expense or constant variable expense. Again, we're taking a variable expense because it goes up and down, and you turn it into a fixed expense. So it reduces stress on how you're going to pay a particular bill, a particular utility bill, when they fluctuate from month to month. The design of the budget, you'll see if you pull up budgeting, if you pull up an example of a budgeting sheet, you'll see that there are different categories within that budgeting sheet. If you came into my office, I'd show you some budgeting sheets, and you'll see that there are different categories marked out. One of those categories is going to be housing. You'll see for rent or maybe your mortgage payment. Just as a side note, I always suggest that your housing should never be more than 25% of your monthly take-home pay. So, for instance, if your monthly take-home pay is $2,000, your housing payment should not be more than $500 a month. If you're paid weekly, and this would be really easy for you to figure out, if you're paid weekly, however much your weekly paycheck is, that's how much your monthly rent should be. The house payment should include your taxes and insurance. Most people's it does because they have an escrow account, so it's already factored in there. For renters, just another side note, for renters, I always suggest that they have renter's insurance. A lot of renters don't know about this or don't see any need for it. But understand, if your apartment building has something wrong with it, if water leaks in somewhere and ruins some of your property, or there's a fire, your landlord is not responsible for your contents. So you want to make sure that you have insurance to cover those expenses. When it comes to renter's insurance, you can typically get it through your car insurance carrier. So whoever you have car insurance through, you can get renter's insurance there. It's typically no more than $10 a month. So maybe you want to call and just get a quote on that. Utility category, this will include things such as gas, electric, water, communications, which would be telephone, television, and trash. Your home budget expense category, this will typically be your largest category. This will include your groceries, your gas, your insurances, medications, church donations, childcare, entertainment, tobacco, savings, an emergency fund. An emergency fund is something that I always suggest individuals have a category for. This would be something that you're setting money aside for in case of an emergency. It's something that's built up over time. For a lot of people, it might mean that you're only putting $25 a month in it, but you just let it continue to build, and over time, it should grow substantially. We oftentimes think about emergencies, or we oftentimes think about things that could happen, but they oftentimes don't happen as often as we think they do. So I've seen that a number of times. And an emergency fund is a good thing to have set aside in case that emergency does come up. Installment loan category. This would be your automobile loans, student loans, past due taxes I put in here, and I'll explain that more in just a second. Recreational vehicles, if you have recreational vehicles, boats, campers, motorcycles, whatever it may be, those would all be installment loans. These are typically loans or expenses that I do not suggest be more than 10% of your take-home pay. So again, if you make $2,000 a month, your car payment, if you have a car payment, should not be more than $200 a month. As you get beyond that 10%, it just increases the likelihood of default. So that's a good number to shoot for. Now, you'll see past due taxes on here, and you also see past due taxes in the next category, which is an unsecured debt. The reason I put past due taxes in the installment loans is typically if you're paying money to the IRS, you set up a payment plan where you have to pay them a set amount of money a month. So say $50. That's something that we have to count on. So we don't want that to be something that your budget is not accounting for, because if you're not paying that money, then the IRS is going to come after you. The same as a judgment. Judgments typically have to be paid at a set amount of money per month, and falling outside of that could result in further legal actions. So judgments and past dues, I typically want to treat as installment loans. However, they are still unsecured debts. There's no collateral behind them. Same thing with credit cards, medical bills, and collections accounts. And collateral just means that if you don't make the monthly payment, there's nothing they can take from you. So like your automobile, if you didn't make your automobile payment, they could repossess your vehicle. So that's a secured debt, whereas these are all unsecured debts. Important considerations. Income should always be greater than or equal to expenses. Like I said, when it comes to budgeting, when you look at the budget equation, there's two sides to that equation. There's income and there's expenses. And the income should always be greater than or equal to your expenses. There will need to be some adjustments for the first couple of months as you learn to live within your budget. You may need to make some tweaks, whether they be your expenses. Sometimes I see individuals who have to find a way to increase their income. Maybe they make changes to their taxes. Maybe they take on a second or a part-time job. Something to help increase the income side of that equation because of the expenses that they have within their budget. One thing I do suggest is that you never give up. It is something that's going to take some time to get used to, but it is also something that is going to benefit your life. So if you feel stressed with your budget, if you feel that you're not making progress, stick with it. If you feel that you'd benefit from some additional coaching or some additional somebody to come alongside of you and help to hold you accountable, you could certainly schedule an appointment to come in to see me. I can help you in certain areas, and in other areas I may refer you out to other agencies that may be able to work with you more on an individual or on a week-to-week, or maybe even on some cases a daily basis. Maybe have some type of a coach that you check in with daily just to see where you're at. And there are certainly agencies here in town that can help you with that. As promised at the beginning of this webinar, I would put my contact information in here, so you'll see that listed here on the screen. You could certainly come in to see me for a one-on-one counseling session if you want to get more in depth or in detail as to what your overall situation is. I've been doing this a number of years. I've got some resources available to me that we can use to help you get on the track that you want to be on. But nonetheless, I can schedule a budget. I can set a budget for you, put a budget together, but overall it is something that you're going to need to follow. The success simply relies on you. I set the roadmap, but you have to follow it. So if you feel that you benefit from additional resources, give me a call at the number above. Thank you.